They called her non-essential. 1 week later, every hour they didn't call her back cost them $3 million. She didn't shout, didn't threaten, didn't sabotage. She simply signed a form, and their system collapsed. All because they thought compliance was something women worry about. My name is Rebecca Lang, and I'm the woman nobody noticed until they needed me. Every morning at 6:45 a.m. sharp, I'd push through the revolving doors of Endava Technologies, balancing my vanilla latte in one hand and my color-coded compliance binders in the other. The security guard Marcus would nod without looking up from his crossword. The night shift developers would shuffle past me toward the exits, their eyes glazed from staring at screens all night. And I'd take the elevator to the 7th floor where my windowless office waited like a faithful dog. 38 years old. Single, no cats, despite what my coworkers probably assumed. My life revolved around frameworks, protocols, and the intricate dance of keeping a healthcare data company on the right side of federal regulations. Sexy stuff, right? That's what Mason Holt said during his first all-hands meeting as our new COO. We need to streamline the sexy stuff and cut the fat from, well, whatever it is Rebecca does down there. The laughter had been polite, but genuine. I'd smiled along, taking notes in my leather-bound journal with the color-coded tabs. Blue for audit trails, green for compliance updates, red was for special occasions. Here's what they didn't understand: Endava Technologies existed because of what I did down there. Every contract worth more than $50,000, every data transfer to our hospital partners, every algorithm update that touched patient information, it all flowed through my desk. Not because I demanded it, but because 4 years ago when the FDA nearly shut us down for violations, I'd built a system so airtight that we hadn't received so much as a warning letter since. My framework wasn't just good, it was art. A living, breathing ecosystem of checks and balances that adapted to every new regulation, every policy shift, every congressional mood swing. I'd integrated blockchain verification before our CTO knew what blockchain was. I'd automated audit trails that would make Fortune 500 compliance teams weep with envy. And I'd done it all from my windowless office fueled by vanilla lattes and the quiet satisfaction of being indispensable. Or so I thought. Mason Holt was 29, Harvard MBA, fond of phrases like disruptive innovation and lean operations. He wore Allbirds sneakers with his Tom Ford suits and carried a moleskin notebook he never wrote in. His LinkedIn profile photo showed him laughing at a TED Talk, and he had the kind of jawline that made our junior staff forget he'd never actually built anything. He'd been hired to modernize our operations. In his first month, he'd replaced our coffee machines with a kombucha tap, instituted walking meetings, and renamed the departments. We weren't legal anymore. We were risk mitigation. IT became digital innovation, and my department compliance became operational integrity, which Mason promptly folded under his direct supervision. "I want to understand what everyone does here," he'd said during our first one-on-one, sitting on the edge of my desk like we were college buddies. "Really get into the weeds." So I'd shown him. For 3 hours, I walked him through our compliance infrastructure. I explained how our digital signature system was linked to specific custodian IDs to maintain chain of custody. I demonstrated the audit prediction algorithm that had saved us $12 million in potential fines last quarter. I even showed him the color-coded emergency protocols that could prevent a federal shutdown with 48 hours' notice. His eyes had glazed over after the first 20 minutes. "This is great, really great," he'd said, already checking his phone. "But couldn't we just, use DocuSign or something?" That should have been my first warning. The second warning came when he hired Carly, fresh out of Syracuse, with a degree in business innovation. She was assigned as my support, which meant she spent most of her time asking if we really needed all these processes and suggesting we move everything to Slack. She wore designer frames without prescription lenses and ended every sentence like it was a question. "So, why can't we just trust people to do the right thing?" she'd asked during her 3rd week playing with her phone while I explained why we needed 3-factor authentication for sensitive data access. "Because federal prison is a real place," I'd answered. She'd laughed like I was joking. The truth is, I'd survived worse. I'd outlasted 5 CEOs, 3 acquisitions, and a hostile takeover attempt. I'd navigated the company through COVID, through layoffs, through that unfortunate incident with the leaked patient data that almost made headlines. I was the institutional memory, the keeper of secrets, the one who knew where all the digital bodies were buried. But I'd made one crucial mistake. I'd been invisible for too long. In a world of influencers and thought leaders, I'd committed the cardinal sin of just doing my job. No LinkedIn posts about compliance innovation. No Medium articles about the future of regulatory technology. Just quiet, consistent excellence that kept the lights on and the feds at bay. I should have seen the ending coming. Should have recognized the signs when Mason started scheduling optimization meetings and talking about role redundancy. Should have worried when he asked if I documented all my processes just in case. But I was too busy keeping us compliant to notice I'd become non-essential. The Zoom invite landed in my inbox at 8:30 a.m. on a Tuesday. Quick sync, organizational updates. 15 minutes, no agenda attached. Mason had CC'd HR, which meant one of 2 things, promotion or execution. Given that I'd been passed over for promotion 3 times in 5 years, I had a pretty good idea which way this would go. I joined the call at 8:44, giving myself exactly 1 minute to settle before the meeting started. My home office was immaculate, books arranged by topic certificates framed and aligned, my emergency compliance binder within arm's reach. The vanilla latte sat cooling on its coaster, a ring of condensation forming beneath. Mason's face filled my screen first, that practiced smile revealing teeth too white to be natural. Behind him, the exposed brick wall of his loft apartment, a guitar nobody believed he could play mounted like a trophy. Beside him, a Brady Bunch grid of faces. Helen from HR, her expression carefully neutral. David from legal, avoiding eye contact. And 2 people I didn't recognize, consultants judging by their generic backgrounds and eager expressions. Rebecca. Thanks for joining us, Mason said as if I'd had a choice. How's your morning going? Productive, I said. I'd already processed 17 compliance updates and flagged 3 potential violations in contracts his team had fast-tracked. I sent you the Q3 audit prep notes. Right. We'll circle back on those. He glanced at something off-screen. So, Rebecca, we wanted to talk about the future of operational integrity. There it was. The corporate speak that preceded every execution. The future of operational integrity, not my future. I reached for my journal, flipped to a fresh page, and uncapped my pen. Red ink today. Special occasions. As you know, Mason continued, we've been evaluating all our processes, looking for efficiencies, synergies, opportunities to break down silos. Helen nodded along like a dashboard bobblehead. David studied his keyboard. We've brought in Deloitte to assess our operational structure. Mason gestured to the consultants who smiled in unison. And they've identified some exciting opportunities for transformation. Exciting. Transformation. I wrote both words in my journal, underlining them twice. The thing is, Rebecca, Mason leaned forward, his concerned leader face activated. Your role has evolved to be quite specialized. And in today's agile environment, we need people who can wear multiple hats. I wear multiple hats, I said. Compliance audit preparation, regulatory liaison, internal investigations. Yes, but those are all basically the same hat. He chuckled at his own cleverness. What we need is more strategic thinking, big picture stuff, innovation. The consultant on the left unmuted herself. What Mason means is that we're moving toward a more integrated model where compliance becomes everyone's responsibility, not just one person's. I almost laughed. Compliance as everyone's responsibility was like making surgery everyone's responsibility. Sure, anyone could hold a scalpel, but would you want them to? So you're eliminating my position, I said. It wasn't a question. Mason's smile flickered. We're sunsetting the role. It's not personal, Rebecca. You've done amazing work. Really amazing. But we need to be more nimble, more responsive to market demands. The market demands we don't get fined out of existence, I said. Helen finally spoke. Rebecca, we want to make this transition as smooth as possible. We're prepared to offer a generous severance package, 2 weeks, plus unused vacation time, and of course we'll provide a positive reference. 2 weeks. 7 years of keeping them out of federal crosshairs, and I was worth 2 weeks. When? I asked. We'd like to transition by end of day Friday, Mason said. That gives you 3 days to document any critical processes, hand off any urgent items to Carly. Carly doesn't have the clearance levels for half my work. We'll figure it out. He waved away my concern like a gnat. The important thing is that we maintain continuity while embracing change. I watched David squirm in his little Zoom box. He knew. He'd been at the company long enough to remember the last time someone thought compliance was optional. The fines, the investigations, the senior VP who did 18 months in minimum security. Rebecca, Helen prompted, do you have any questions? I had dozens. Who would handle the FDA's surprise audits? Who knew the personal cell numbers of the federal investigators? Who understood that our entire verification system depended on my biometric signatures? Who would wake up at 3 a.m. when the automated alerts detected anomalies? Instead, I asked, is this negotiable? Mason's face arranged itself into sympathy. I'm afraid the decision has been made, but we're confident this is the best path forward for everyone. I clicked my pen closed, capped it carefully, set it perpendicular to my journal. I see, I said. You're taking this very well, Helen said, relief creeping into her voice. We appreciate your professionalism. I smiled. The same smile I'd worn through 7 years of being overlooked, undervalued, and underestimated. I've always been professional. Exactly, and that's why we know you'll help make this transition seamless, Mason said. Carly's excited to learn from you. We've scheduled daily knowledge transfer sessions. I'll need that severance agreement in writing, I interrupted, with the specific end date and final responsibilities outlined. Of course, Helen nodded. I'll send it over this afternoon. Great, I said. Then because I couldn't resist, you might want to also send over the Q3 federal audit requirements. The submission deadline is Monday. Mason's smile tightened. Carly can handle that. Carly doesn't have custodian privileges in the system. We'll get her set up. The federal system requires a 30-day verification period for new custodians. Rebecca, his tone had an edge now. We'll handle it. That's what adaptability looks like. I nodded, made a final note in my journal. 3 words, red ink, careful letters. Any other questions? Helen asked. Just one, I said. Who's going to tell the auditors? Silence. What auditors? Mason finally asked. I closed my journal. The ones who come calling when our compliance infrastructure collapses. But I'm sure you've thought of that. After all, you've got consultants. The Deloitte duo shifted uncomfortably. David had gone pale. Is that a threat, Rebecca? Mason's jaw tightened. It's a question, I said. You should probably figure out the answer. You've got 3 days. I left the meeting without saying goodbye. Closed my laptop. Finished my cold vanilla latte. Then I opened my journal again and flipped to the section marked with a black tab. The section I'd hoped I'd never need. But hope-like compliance was something Mason Holt didn't understand. He would, though. Soon. Friday came faster than expected. I spent 3 days documenting processes Carly would never understand, creating flowcharts she'd never follow, and writing instructions she'd probably post on Slack with a confused emoji. The child meant well, but meaning well wouldn't stop a federal investigation. My last vanilla latte at Endeva Technologies tasted the same as the first. The security guard, Marcus, actually looked up from his crossword when I handed him my access badge. You quitting? He asked. Being Sunset, I corrected. He shook his head. They're idiots. Yes, I agreed. They are. The 7th floor was quieter than usual. Word had spread as word does in offices where everyone pretends not to gossip. A few brave souls stopped by my windowless office to express regret, admiration variations of, "This place won't be the same without you." David from legal lingered in my doorway looking like he wanted to say something important. "The FDA audit," he finally managed. "Rebecca, without you." "Not my problem anymore," I said, sealing another box. "Mason's got it handled. He's adaptable." David's laugh was bitter. "We're fucked." "That's a compliance violation," I said. "Profanity in the workplace. Section 12.3 of the Employee Handbook." He left without saying goodbye. Smart man. By 3 p.m., I'd packed 7 years into 4 boxes. My certifications, my awards few but meaningful, my color-coded binders that contained the actual knowledge Carly thought lived in the cloud. The office looked naked without them, just corporate gray walls and the ghost of dedication. Carly actually knocked at 3:30. "Hi, Rebecca. So I know this is awkward, but Mason wanted me to get your passwords and stuff." I looked at her. Really looked at her. 23, maybe 24. Full of confidence that came from never having been catastrophically wrong. Never having watched a company bleed money because someone forgot to file a form. Never having been screamed at by federal investigators at 6 a.m. on a Sunday. "Sit down," I said. She perched on the edge of the chair like a bird ready to flee. I pulled out a manila folder heavy with documentation. "These are the system access protocols," I said. "You'll need to memorize them. The federal portal times out after 90 seconds of inactivity, and 3 failed login attempts trigger a 72-hour lockout." Her eyes widened. "Can't we just use Password Manager?" "No." "But page 47 explains why. Study it." I walked her through the basics. Showed her how to navigate the federal compliance portal, where to find the audit schedules, how to respond to surprise inspection notices. She took notes on her phone, which would have been funny if it weren't so tragic. "Oh," I said almost as an afterthought, "you'll need to register as a custodian of record." "Cool, how do I do that?" "Page 93, but there's a problem." She looked up from her phone. "What kind of problem?" "The system only allows 1 active custodian per organization. You can't be added until I'm removed." "So, remove yourself." I smiled. "I will. But you should know custodian changes trigger an automatic audit flag. The FDA will want to verify the transition within 72 hours. "That's fine, right? We'll just tell them you left." Sweet child. "They'll want documentation, transition protocols, evidence of knowledge transfer, proof that the new custodian understands federal requirements." I paused. "Your Syracuse degree might not be enough." The first crack in her confidence appeared. "But you're training me." "For 3 hours. I trained for 7 years." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You're trying to scare me." "No," I said. "I'm trying to prepare you. There's a difference." I spent the next hour showing her the critical systems. The audit tracker that predicted federal inspections with 87% accuracy. The violation database that could prevent million-dollar mistakes. The encrypted communication channel with our federal liaison that had taken 2 years to establish. "This is a lot," she finally admitted. "Yes. Maybe you could stay on as a consultant, help with the transition." I almost felt sorry for her, almost. Mason made it clear my role was being sunset. Can't consult on something that doesn't exist. She left at 4:45, clutching her phone full of notes she'd never organize, carrying knowledge she'd never synthesize. I watched her go, then turned to my computer for the last time. The custodian management system was elegant in its simplicity. My biometric signature, my encrypted keys, my federal identification number, all linked to a single profile that verified every compliance document Indiva submitted. 7 years of building trust with federal regulators crystallized into a digital identity they recognized and respected. The deactivation screen required 3 confirmations. "Are you sure you want to deactivate custodian privileges?" "Yes." "This action will require federal notification within 24 hours. Continue." "Yes." "Final confirmation, deactivating custodian status will prevent submission of compliance documentation until a new custodian is verified. Proceed?" "Yes." The screen flashed once. A simple message appeared. Custodian Rebecca Lang deactivated at 4:59 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Federal notification will be sent in 24 hours. Have a compliant day. I didn't delete anything. Didn't sabotage any systems. Didn't plant any logic bombs or time-delayed viruses. I simply exercised my right to resign from a voluntary position I'd held in addition to my regular duties. A position that technically wasn't even part of my job description. I logged out, cleaned my desk one final time, and picked up my boxes. The security escort company policy for terminated employees was a kid from IT. I'd helped avoid a compliance violation last year. He carried 2 of my boxes without being asked. "This is bullshit," he muttered as we waited for the elevator. "This is business," I corrected. "They don't know what you do here." "No," I agreed. "They don't." The elevator descended in silence. 7 floors of gravity pulling me away from 7 years of my life. In the lobby, Marcus had my personal items from the security desk, waiting an umbrella phone charger, spare cardigan I'd forgotten existed. "Take care, Rebecca," he said. "You too, Marcus." I loaded my car methodically. Boxes in the trunk, purse in the passenger seat. 7 years of muscle memory already fading. My phone buzzed a LinkedIn notification. Mason Holt had updated his status. "Excited to announce we've streamlined our operations for greater efficiency. Sometimes you have to sunset the old to make room for innovation. # leadership, # change management, # future forward." I sat in my car for a moment, engine off, watching the building I'd protected fade in the rearview mirror. Somewhere on the 7th floor, Carly was probably uploading my handwritten notes to the cloud, confident that technology would save her. Mason was probably celebrating the salary he'd saved, the headcount he'd reduced, the efficiency he'd created. And somewhere in Washington, a federal computer system had just logged a critical change. Rebecca Lang, custodian of record for Indiva Technologies, no longer active. Notification pending. Clock starting. I drove home slowly, obeying every traffic law with the same precision I'd applied to federal regulations. My phone rang twice, unknown numbers I didn't answer. By the time I reached my apartment, the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of warnings ignored. I poured myself a glass of wine, good wine, the kind I'd been saving for either celebration or catastrophe. Then I opened my personal laptop and logged into my private email. One new message sent to myself 3 hours ago. Subject line: "Voluntary deactivation confirmed." Attached was a PDF. My resignation as custodian of record, properly formatted, legally binding, irrevocably submitted. I raised my glass to the screen. "Have a compliant day," I whispered. Then I closed the laptop and waited for the storm I knew would come. Mason thought he'd fired a non-essential employee. He'd actually lit a 72-hour fuse. Monday morning arrived with the inevitability of gravity. I was at my kitchen table working through my second cup of coffee and a freelance compliance review for a startup when my phone lit up with the first distress signal. David from legal calling at 7:23 a.m. I let it go to voicemail. 2 minutes later, a text: "Rebecca urgent, please call." Then another Fed portal is asking for Q2, Q3 verification, today. I took another sip of coffee, returned to my freelance work. The startup's documentation was a mess, but a fixable mess. Unlike what was happening 7 miles away in a glass tower where someone had just opened an email they didn't understand. By 8 a.m., my phone was having a seizure. 17 missed calls. 43 texts. Even an email to my personal account from an address I didn't recognize, probably Carly panicking from her Gmail because she couldn't figure out the corporate system. The email that started the avalanche would have been simple, automated, sent precisely 72 hours after my custodian deactivation, just as I'd told Carly it would. Something like, "Notice custodian of record change detected for organization ID number 447829. Please confirm current custodian for Q2, Q3 audit materials within 48 hours. Failure to respond may result in compliance review." Harmless language hiding a loaded gun. I knew the scene unfolding at Indiva without needing to see it. Mason would have forwarded the email to Carly with something dismissive. "Handle this." Carly would have tried to log into the federal portal with credentials that didn't exist for a role she didn't have. The system would have rejected her. She'd try again. Rejected. Again. Locked out. Panic would set in around 8:30 when she realized the instruction manual I'd given her was written in a language she'd never learned. Compliance isn't English. It's a dialect of precision spoken only by those who've been burned by imprecision. My phone rang again. This time a number I recognized from the executive floor. Helen from HR. I answered on the sixth ring. Rebecca Lang. Rebecca, thank God, we have a situation. I'm no longer an Endava employee, Helen. I'm not sure how I can help. The federal portal, it's asking for verification, and Carly can't we need... She was stammering, professional composure cracking. What exactly do you need? The system says we don't have a custodian of record, but that's impossible. You trained Carly. She should be in the system. I let the silence stretch. Then, did Carly complete the federal registration process? She says you didn't show her how. Page 93 of the transition document I provided. Section 4 details the registration requirements. Rebecca, please, can you just walk her through it? I'm not authorized to provide federal compliance guidance to Endava Technologies. That would be practicing without a license given I'm no longer employed there. This is ridiculous. You worked here until Friday. And my custodian credentials were deactivated at 4:59 p.m. per federal requirements for separated employees. The notification would have been sent 72 hours later, this morning, I believe. The math was sinking in. I could hear it in her breathing. You did this on purpose. I followed standard deactivation procedures. Nothing more, nothing less. Rebecca, if we don't respond to this audit request, then I suggest you have your current compliance team respond to it. We don't have a compliance team. We have Carly. Then you have Carly. She hung up. By 9 a.m., the real panic had set in. David's texts had evolved from professional to desperate. Fed deadline is in 39 hours. Mason is losing his shit. Carly is crying in the bathroom. Please, Rebecca, people's jobs are on the line. That last one almost made me laugh. People's jobs. As if mine hadn't been on the line when Mason decided compliance was non-essential. At 9:47, a new player entered the game. A 202 area code, Washington, D.C. Ms. Lang, this is Patricia Holstead from the Federal Health Data Compliance Division. I'm calling regarding Endava Technologies. I'm no longer employed by Endava, Ms. Holstead. I'm aware. That's why I'm calling. You're listed as the custodian of record for the past 7 years. Your deactivation triggered our review protocol. Standard procedure, I said. Indeed, and quite prudent of you to follow it. However, Endava seems to be having difficulty providing a replacement custodian. They've submitted a name, Carly Morrison, but she doesn't appear in our certification database. She wouldn't. She's not certified. A pause. I see. And she's their only compliance officer. I believe they've restructured. Compliance is now everyone's responsibility. Patricia Holstead actually laughed, a short, sharp sound like a nail gun. Everyone's responsibility. How modern. Well, Ms. Lang, I'm required to inform you that we've initiated a standard review. Endava has 36 hours to provide a certified custodian or face-extended audit procedures. I understand. I'm also authorized to tell you that expedited certification is available for experienced professionals. The process takes about 6 hours, costs $15,000, and requires a sponsoring organization. Interesting. Just thought you should know. Have a pleasant day, Ms. Lang. She hung up, leaving me with the certain knowledge that the federal government had just fired a warning shot across Endava's bow. 36 hours to find a certified custodian. 6 hours to create one if they had $15,000 and someone who knew the process. The math was beautiful in its simplicity. They had one person who understood the certification process, me. But I was no longer their employee, and Mason had made it clear my role didn't exist. By 10:30, the calls had stopped. Either they'd found a solution unlikely, or someone had imposed a communication blackout while they figured out their next move. I imagined the war room scene, Mason pacing, barking about adaptation and innovation, legal sweating through their shirts. Carly probably still in the bathroom realizing her Syracuse degree hadn't prepared her for federal investigators. And somewhere the Deloitte consultants calculating how many billable hours this crisis would generate. At 11:15, a text from an unknown number. Rebecca, this is Mason Holt. I'd like to discuss a consulting arrangement. Please call immediately. I deleted it. At 11:43, another. Name your price. I screenshotted that one, for my records. At 12:10 p.m., my doorbell rang. A courier with a sealed envelope. Inside a single sheet on Indiva letterhead. Rebecca, the company requires your expertise for a critical transition period. We are prepared to offer a consulting agreement at competitive rates. Please contact us at your earliest convenience. Regards, Mason Holt, Chief Operating Officer. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just the assumption that I'd come running when called. That money would erase the simple fact that I'd been deemed non-essential. I set the letter aside and returned to my freelance project. The startup CEO had sent a grateful email, amazed at how quickly I'd identified their compliance gaps. She'd asked if I'd consider a longer engagement. I was drafting my response when my phone buzzed again. David, one final text. Fed just sent second notice. 24 hours. Mason authorized whatever it takes to get you back. Rebecca, please. We're drowning. I looked at the text for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop and began typing a different kind of response. Not to David or Mason or the crying intern who'd thought compliance was just about trusting people to do the right thing. To my lawyer. Subject line, reconsulting rate schedule for emergency compliance services. The body was brief. As discussed, $1,250 per hour, 3-day minimum, payment in advance, non-negotiable. I hit send and went to lunch. The storm I'd predicted hadn't just arrived. It was perfect. Tuesday morning brought the kind of clarity that only comes with desperation. My phone started ringing at 6:12 a.m. David again, this time his voice carried the hollow tone of someone who'd been up all night. Rebecca, I need you to understand something. The Q2, Q3 reports, they're not just sitting in the system waiting. They need custodian verification. Without it, they're just paper. Digital paper, I corrected, reaching for my coffee. But yes, 300 pages of digital paper, 6 months of audit trails, $47 million in contracts that need federal approval. He paused. All worthless without a verified signature. I'd known the scope, of course. I'd prepared those reports myself, carefully documenting every transaction, every data transfer, every algorithm update that touched patient information, each page bearing my digital seal waiting for final submission. A submission that required an active custodian. Carly tried to submit them yesterday, David continued. The system laughed at her. Actually laughed, there's an error sound, and I swear it sounds like laughing. That's the authentication failure alert. I designed it to be memorable. Jesus Christ, Rebecca, you designed it. 4 years ago, after the third intern tried to submit unverified documents, the FDA suggested we needed a more distinctive warning system. The silence on his end was telling. They were just beginning to understand how deeply I'd embedded myself in their infrastructure. Not through ego or empire building, but through the simple accumulation of solutions to problems they'd never known existed. At 7 a.m., the real panic began. I watched it unfold through LinkedIn, of all places, where Mason had posted another update. Facing challenges with regulatory transitions. Looking for immediate compliance consulting support. Budget approved. Please share with your networks. #urgent, #compliance, #health tech. Budget approved. From the man who'd calculated my worth at 2 weeks severance. By 8, the situation had evolved from crisis to catastrophe. Helen from HR called from what sounded like a war room, multiple voices in the background. Someone shouting about deadlines, the distinctive sound of expensive panic. Rebecca, I'll be direct. We need you back, today, as a consultant. We're prepared to meet your rate. My lawyer sent my terms yesterday. $1,250 an hour. Yes, we'll pay it. 3-day minimum paid in advance. That's, she did the math, $30,000. $30,750 accounting for the standard 8-hour days plus emergency overtime provisions. For 3 days' work. For 3 days of expertise you deemed non-essential last week. The background noise quieted. I could picture them all leaning in, waiting for Helen's response. Waiting to see if their compliance problems could be solved with the corporate equivalent of a blank check. Rebecca, be reasonable. You know that's excessive. What's excessive is thinking a 23-year-old with no federal certification could replace 7 years of institutional knowledge. But here we are. This is extortion. This is consulting. Market rate for emergency specialized services. She hung up. They always did when the math hurt too much. But math was nothing compared to what happened at 9:17 a.m. when the Federal Health Data Compliance Division made their next move. Patricia Holstead didn't call this time. She sent an email. Not to me, I was copied as a courtesy, but to Endeva's entire executive team. Subject: Notice of Preliminary Compliance Review. Immediate action required. The language was bureaucratically beautiful. Dear Endeva Technologies leadership, our records indicate your organization currently lacks a certified custodian of record. As of 9:00 a.m., EST all compliance documentation submitted without proper custodial verification has been flagged for review. Please be advised, 347 documents totaling 47.3 mm. In contract value are now suspended pending verification. Q2, Q3 audit materials must be resubmitted with proper authentication. Failure to provide certified custodian credentials within 12 hours will result in expanded review procedures. Per Federal Regulation HC 447.3. Organizations under expanded review are subject to daily assessment penalties. Contact our office immediately to discuss remediation options. Regards, Patricia Holstead, Senior Compliance Administrator. Daily assessment penalties. She hadn't mentioned a number, but I knew the formula. It started at $50,000 a day and scaled based on company revenue. For Endeva, it would be closer to $3 million per day. My phone exploded. Texts, calls, emails, even a desperate LinkedIn message from Carly. Rebecca, I'm so sorry. Please help. I don't understand any of this. At least she was honest. At 10 a.m., Mason Holt himself called. I let it ring through to voicemail, then listened to his message. Rebecca Mason here. Look, we may have miscommunicated during your transition. I'd like to fix that. Call me back, please. Miscommunicated, as if your non-essential had multiple interpretations. By 11, the lawyers had taken over. Endeva's general counsel, not David, but someone higher, someone who'd probably been golfing when this started, called, with the kind of forced calm that preceded 7-figure settlements. Ms. Lang, I'm Timothy Brennan, Chief Legal Officer at Endeva. I understand you've proposed certain consulting terms. My lawyer proposed them. I'm just a private citizen now. Yes, well. Your terms have been accepted. We'll wire the funds within the hour. Can you start immediately? Upon receipt and confirmation of payment. Ms. Lang, you understand the situation is critical. I understood that last week. You didn't. He sighed. The sound of a man calculating litigation costs versus consulting fees and finding the math unfavorable. The funds will be sent immediately. We need you on site by noon. I'll be there at 12:30, traffic permitting. The federal deadline is at 9 p.m. tonight, I'm aware. That gives us 8.5 hours. More than enough time assuming no one interrupts my work with meetings about synergy. No one will interrupt you. And Mr. Brennan, I'll need full system access restored. All of it. Including the administrative privileges Mason revoked 2 months ago because he thought they were redundant. Done. And a written statement acknowledging that my role is essential to Endeva's federal compliance. A pause. That seems unnecessary. Then find another consultant. Fine, you'll have it. I hung up and looked at my reflection in my laptop screen. Same face that had walked out of Indava's building on Friday. Same hands that had built their compliance infrastructure from scratch. But something had shifted. The power dynamic had inverted, and everyone knew it. At 11:47, my phone chimed. Wire transfer confirmation, $30,750 received. I closed my laptop, changed into my most expensive suit, the one I'd bought for a promotion interview I'd never gotten, and drove toward the building I'd protected for 7 years. The parking lot was fuller than usual. Federal auditors' cars were easy to spot, generic sedans with government plates parked in visitor spaces like sharks circling wounded prey. I pulled into my old spot, the one with the perfect angle to avoid afternoon sun, and sat for a moment. 7 years of coming here, building something I'd thought mattered. Creating systems that kept people employed, kept the company running, kept the feds at bay. All of it dismissed in a 15-minute Zoom call. But now they understood. Not the full scope that would take years to appreciate, but enough. Enough to wire $30,000 for 3 days of my time. Enough to admit in writing that I was essential. My phone buzzed. David, they're all in conference room A, waiting for you. I typed back, they can wait 5 more minutes. I'm reviewing their written statement. I wasn't, of course. I was savoring something rarer than competence or compliance or even cash. Vindication. At 12:29, I walked through Indava's front doors. Marcus looked up from his crossword, did a double take, and actually smiled. Welcome back, Ms. Lang. I'm not back, Marcus. I'm consulting. Sure, he said, sliding a visitor badge across the desk. But it's good to see someone who knows what they're doing. I clipped the badge to my jacket. Visitor, temporary. Worth $1,250 an hour. The elevator ride to 7 felt different. Lighter. Like ascending to a battlefield where you've already won. They'd fired the woman they'd called non-essential. Now they were about to learn what essential really cost. Conference room A looked like a crime scene where the victim was confidence. Federal auditors occupied one side of the table, 3 of them tablets out, expressions neutral in that way that meant someone was about to bleed money. Indava's leadership packed the other side. Mason Helen, Timothy Brennan, 2 Deloitte consultants, and Carly, who looked like she'd aged 5 years since Friday. Patricia Holstead sat at the head of the table. I'd never met her in person, but recognized the type mid-50s gray suit that meant business eyes that had seen every corporate excuse ever invented. She looked up when I entered, and something like amusement crossed her face. Ms. Lang, thank you for joining us. I took the empty chair at the foot of the table, the defendant's position usually, but today it felt like a throne. Ms. Holstead, gentlemen. I nodded to her team, then turned to Indava's side. I understand we have a situation. Mason started to speak, but Brennan cut him off with a look that could have frozen hell. The lawyer had clearly taken control, which meant they finally understood how bad this was. Rebecca, we need you to verify the Q2, Q3 reports and establish Carly as the new custodian, Brennan said. The federal team has concerns about our compliance infrastructure. Concerns, like calling a cardiac arrest a slight irregularity. I'll need to review the current status first, I said, opening my laptop. Has anyone touched the report since Friday? Carly raised her hand like a student. I opened them, but the system kept asking for biometric verification, and my thumbprint wouldn't. Your thumbprint was never registered in the federal system, I said. Biometric authentication requires a chain of custody. I can't just add you. Why not? Mason finally spoke, frustration bleeding through his executive calm. Patricia Holstead answered for me. Because that would be fraud, Mr. Holt. Federal custodianship isn't a job title you pass around. It's a legal responsibility with personal liability. I watched Mason's face as the words personal liability landed. He'd thought firing me was about saving money. He hadn't considered that compliance failures could follow him home. Let's start with the immediate problem, I said, logging into the federal portal. My credentials still worked small miracles. Ms. Holstead, what triggered this review? The automated system flagged an anomaly, she said. 347 documents requiring custodian verification submitted by a non-existent entity. Carly Morrison tried to submit them. Someone tried to submit them using Ms. Morrison's name. But since she's not in our system, it registered as potential fraud. Fraud. The word hung in the air like a guillotine. I pulled up the documents, my fingers remembering passwords my brain had tried to forget. The reports appeared, my reports bearing my digital seal, waiting for final submission. 6 months of meticulous work trapped in limbo. The good news, I said, is that the documents themselves are intact. My custodian seal is still valid for past dated materials. I can verify and submit these within the hour. Visible relief from Indiva's side of the table. The bad news, I continued, is that establishing a new custodian will take 6 to 8 weeks. What? Mason's composure cracked. That's impossible. Carly's been training. For 3 hours, I interrupted. Federal certification requires 200 hours of documented training, a comprehensive exam, and a probationary period under an existing custodian's supervision. But you could expedite it, Brennan said. It wasn't a question. I could, if I were an employee. But consultants can't sponsor new custodians. Federal Regulation HC 447.5. Patricia Holstead nodded approvingly. Ms. Lang knows her regulations. So what are our options? Brennan asked. I looked at the audit team, then back at Indiva's executives. You have 3 options. 1, operate without a custodian and face daily penalties until you find a certified replacement. At your revenue level, that's about $3 million per day. Carly made a sound like a dying mouse. 2, hire a certified custodian from another company. The going rate for someone with federal healthcare compliance certification is around $200,000 a year plus signing bonus, assuming you can find one who's willing to jump into this situation. And 3, Brennan asked. 3, rehire your previous custodian as a full-time employee with the authority to maintain your compliance infrastructure. Silence. Even the auditors seemed to hold their breath. Mason's jaw worked like he was chewing glass. We eliminated that position. Then you eliminated your compliance capability, Patricia Holstead said. Ms. Lang, would you excuse us for a moment? I need to discuss penalty structures with Indiva's leadership. I stood. I'll be in the break room. Call when you need me to submit the reports. The break room still had the same terrible coffee and motivational posters. I made myself a cup anyway, more for the familiarity than the caffeine. Through the window, I could see the federal auditors' sedans waiting like patient predators. My phone buzzed. A text from my lawyer. They're going to cave. Don't accept the first offer. Good advice, but unnecessary. I wasn't negotiating anymore. Either they understood my value or they paid $3 million a day to learn it. 23 minutes later, Carly found me. Her designer frames were gone, probably broken in a bathroom crying session. She looked younger without them and thoroughly defeated. They want you back in there, she said. Then quietly, I'm sorry. For what? I thought it was easy. What you do. Mason said it was just paperwork and procedures, that anyone could do it with the right attitude. I looked at her, really looked at her. Syracuse degree, probably student loans thrown into a situation nobody had prepared her for. She wasn't the enemy. She was collateral damage in Mason's war on infrastructure. It is paperwork and procedures, I said. Also federal law, statistical analysis, risk assessment, and relationships built over years. But sure, paperwork and procedures. I don't want your job, she said suddenly. I never wanted it. I just wanted to be useful. Then learn, I said. If I come back, if you'll report to me, and I'll teach you. Really teach you, not the 3-hour version. But understand, compliance isn't about innovation or disruption or whatever Mason's selling. It's about keeping people out of prison. Can you handle that? She nodded, something like hope flickering in her eyes. Back in conference room, the atmosphere had shifted from panic to resignation. Patricia Holstead's team had apparently laid out exactly how much this would cost, and the numbers had done what my warnings never could, made believers out of skeptics. Rebecca, Brennan said, we'd like to discuss your return to Indiva Technologies. As an employee, As Senior Director of Compliance reporting directly to the CEO. Full benefits, 40% raise from your previous salary, and written acknowledgement of your essential status. 40%. They'd calculated that I'd negotiate and started low, but I wasn't interested in their money anymore. I'll need more than that, I said. Mason's face darkened, but Brennan held up a hand. What else? Autonomous department. I hire my team, set my budget, and no one overrides my compliance decisions, including Mr. Holt. That's not how we operate, Mason said. It's how you'll operate if you want to avoid federal oversight. Patricia Holstead interjected. Ms. Lang's terms seem reasonable given the circumstances. I also want a 3-year contract with a substantial severance clause, I continued. If anyone decides I'm non-essential again, it'll cost you 2 years' salary plus benefits. That's non-negotiable. Brennan looked at Mason, who looked like he'd swallowed a bee. But the math was inescapable. 2 years of my salary was nothing compared to 1 week of federal fines. Done, Brennan said. I opened my laptop. I'll submit the Q2, Q3 reports now. Ms. Holstead, the verification should appear in your system within 5 minutes. My fingers flew across the keyboard, entering codes I'd never forgotten navigating systems I'd built. The reports uploaded one by one, each bearing my digital seal, each representing thousands of hours of work they'd deemed non-essential. At 3:47 p.m., the final document was submitted. The federal portal confirmed receipt with a pleasant chime, nothing like the mocking laugh Carly had triggered. Verification complete. Patricia Holstead announced, checking her tablet. Indiva Technologies is now in compliance for Q2, Q3 reporting period. The relief in the room was palpable, but I wasn't done. There's one more thing, I said. The penalty assessment. What penalty? Brennan asked. We've resolved the compliance issue. Patricia Holstead smiled, the first real emotion I'd seen from her. Ms. Lang is correct. While you've resolved the reporting issue, you operated without a custodian for 72 hours. That triggers an automatic penalty. How much? Mason asked, though his expression said he already knew it would hurt. Given the voluntary nature of the lapse and the quick resolution, we can limit it to the minimum $100,000. In the grand scheme of Indiva's finances, $100,000 was pocket change. But it was the principle that mattered. A 6-figure reminder that compliance wasn't optional, wasn't non-essential, wasn't something you could innovate away. Pay it, Brennan said quietly. The meeting dispersed after that. The federal auditors packed up their tablets with the efficiency of people who did this every day. Indiva's leadership filed out in silence, probably heading to update their resumes. Only Mason lingered, standing by the window, staring at the parking lot. You planned this, he said, not turning around. I followed procedure, I replied. You planned this when you decided I was expendable. He turned then, and for a moment I saw past the MBA swagger to something almost human. I was trying to modernize, to make us more agile. You can't be agile with federal law, Mason. It doesn't care about your innovation. He left without another word. By 5 p.m., my new office with a window was ready. My boxes, which had never left the building's loading dock, were returned. It restored my full access, sheepishly admitting they'd been locked out of half the systems I'd built. I sat at my new desk watching the sun set over the city and felt something I hadn't experienced in 7 years at Indiva respected. My phone buzzed. A text from Carly. Thank you for agreeing to train me. When do we start? Monday, I typed back. 8 a.m. sharp. Bring coffee. Real coffee, not the break room stuff. We have a lot of work to do. $3 million an hour. That's what my absence had cost them. Not in the end. Patricia had been merciful, but in potential. In the very real possibility that their streamlined, innovative, non-essential free organization could have bled out on the altar of Mason's ego. I pulled up the federal portal one more time, looking at my reinstated credentials. Rebecca Lang, Senior Director of Compliance, Custodian of Record. Essential. While Indiva's leadership spent Tuesday afternoon in crisis mode, I was somewhere else entirely. 3 blocks away on the rooftop bar of the Meridian Hotel, watching the sunset paint the city gold. while nursing an overpriced espresso martini. My phone sat face down on the table, buzzing like an angry hornet. Each vibration was another desperate attempt to reach me. Texts, calls, emails, probably even LinkedIn messages. But I'd already responded to the only message that mattered, my lawyer's confirmation that Indiva's $30,750 wire transfer had cleared. Celebrating. I looked up to find James Morrison, senior compliance consultant at our biggest competitor, Vanguard Health Systems. Not a coincidence I'd texted him the location an hour ago. Contemplating, I said, gesturing to the empty chair across from me. He sat, ordered a whiskey neat, and studied me with the kind of interest that came from recognizing opportunity. Heard Indiva had some federal visitors today. News travels fast. Patricia Holstead's team doesn't show up for routine inspections. What happened? I took a sip of my martini, letting him wait. In the distance, Indiva's building stood like a monument to corporate hubris, its glass facade reflecting the dying light. They decided compliance was non-essential, I finally said. James whistled low. And you were their custodian. Was, past tense. Jesus, Rebecca. They fired their only certified custodian. He laughed, but it was the laugh of someone who understood exactly what that meant. What's the damage? Potentially $3 million a day in fines. Actually, they'll probably skate with $100,000 and a strongly worded letter. Because they called me. His whiskey arrived. He raised it in a mock toast. To consulting rates. To understanding your value, I corrected. We drank in comfortable silence. James and I had crossed paths at conferences, federal training sessions, the small circle where healthcare compliance professionals gathered to share war stories and whiskey. He knew what it was like to be the only person standing between a company and federal devastation. The only one who understood that innovation meant nothing if you were serving time for violations. Vanguard's looking, he said eventually. Senior director position, full autonomy, report directly to the board. I'm flattered. You should be. We poached our last compliance head from Johnson & Johnson. But you just brought a company to its knees with a resignation letter. I didn't bring them to their knees, I said. I just stopped holding them up. My phone buzzed again. This time I glanced at it. Mason Holt. Please call immediately. Federal deadline approaching. I showed James the screen. He nearly choked on his whiskey. You're not answering. My consulting agreement specifies business hours. It's 5:37 p.m. Cold. Professional. He leaned back, studying me with newfound respect. You know what I love about this? They probably thought they were being smart. Cutting overhead. Streamlining operations. Everyone's expendable in the age of optimization, I said. Until they're not. What's your endgame here? They'll have to take you back. On my terms. Which are, I smiled, expensive. Another buzz. This time Helen from HR. Rebecca, please. We need you on site ASAP. They sound desperate, James observed. They should have thought of that before they called me non-essential. You could have warned them, told them what would happen. I did. In the Zoom call. Asked who would handle federal auditors. Mason said they'd figure it out. Ah, James understood. We'd both been in rooms where our warnings were dismissed as negativity, our caution branded as resistance to change. And now they're figuring it out. At $3 million a day, the math gets clear pretty quickly. He finished his whiskey, pulled out his card. When you're done making them suffer, call me. Vanguard knows the value of keeping the feds happy. I might, but first I have some consulting to do. How much are you charging them? $12.50 an hour, 3-day minimum. He laughed a real laugh this time. That's beautiful. You know they'll pay it. They already have. He stood, dropped cash on the table for both our drinks. Rebecca, you're my hero. I'm going to tell this story at every compliance conference for the next decade. After he left, I sat alone on the rooftop watching the city lights flicker to life. Somewhere in Indiva's building, executives were scrambling, lawyers were calculating, and a young woman named Carly was probably Googling federal compliance certification and realizing it wasn't a weekend course. My phone rang. Timothy Brennan, Chief Legal Officer. This time I answered. Ms. Lang, we need you on site immediately. The federal deadline is at 9 p.m. Yes, I'm aware. I'll be there by 7. 7 that only gives us 2 hours. Which is 90 minutes more than I need, traffic permitting. This isn't a game, Rebecca. No, I agreed. It's business. Your business specifically, which requires my expertise. Expertise you'll have access to in approximately 90 minutes. We're hemorrhaging money every second. No, you're not. The fines don't start until 9 p.m. What you're hemorrhaging is confidence. There's a difference. He hung up. They always did when the truth cut too deep. I finished my martini, slowly savoring the burn of vodka and the view of a city that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. 7 years of thankless work, of being overlooked and undervalued, of building systems that saved millions while earning thousands. All of it leading to this moment, this perfect reversal of fortune. At 6:45, I stood, smoothed my suit, and prepared for the performance of a lifetime. Not the frantic scramble of someone desperate to help, but the measured pace of someone who understood their worth. The drive to Indeva took exactly 12 minutes. I could have made it in 8, but there was something poetic about arriving at 7 sharp. Punctual but not eager, professional but not forgiving. Marcus was still at the security desk, probably pulling overtime because of the federal circus. He had a visitor badge ready, the same one from this afternoon. They're all waiting for you upstairs, he said. Conference room A, same as before. Let them wait, I said, clipping on the badge. I need to stop by my office first. Your office? The one with the window, 5th floor. He grinned. About time you got a real office. The elevator ride felt different in the evening. Quieter. Most of the staff had fled, leaving only the essential personnel, a category that now ironically included me. The 5th floor was nearly empty, just a few lights in legal, and the glow from conference room A, where my presence was desperately awaited. My new office was exactly as I'd left it. Boxes still packed, computer still logged in, window still offering that million-dollar view. I took my time, hanging my jacket, arranging my desk, booting up the compliance systems I'd need. 7:09 p.m. Time to begin. I walked to conference room A with measured steps, carrying my laptop and a single manila folder. Through the glass I could see them, Mason pacing Brennan on his phone, Helen typing furiously, Carly staring at nothing with the hollow expression of someone who'd learned too much too fast. I knocked once and entered without waiting for permission. Rebecca. Helen practically leaped from her chair. Thank God. We have less than 2 hours. 1 hour and 51 minutes, I corrected, taking my seat at the foot of the table. Shall we begin? Mason stopped pacing. Begin? Just submit the damn reports. I opened my laptop with deliberate calm. First, I'll need to review what Carly attempted. Every keystroke, every error, every failed login. Federal audit trails are unforgiving. We don't have time. We have exactly the time we need, I said, meeting his eyes. Unless you'd prefer to explain to Patricia Holstead why you rushed through federal compliance procedures. Again. That shut him up. I turned to Carly. Walk me through everything you did. Every click, every screen, every error message. For the next 20 minutes, I listened to her fumbling explanation, occasionally, nodding, frequently typing. The room watched in tense silence as I navigated screens they'd never seen, entered codes they'd never known existed, accessed systems they'd thought were simple. Here's your first problem, I said, turning my laptop to show them. Carly's attempts triggered a fraud alert. 3 failed logins with invalid credentials. The system locked her IP address. So unlock it, Mason said. I can't. Only a federal administrator can reverse a fraud lock. Patricia Holstead specifically. The color drained from his face. Call her. I could, but that would require explaining why your uncertified employee attempted to impersonate a federal custodian. I paused. That's a felony, by the way. Carly made a small, terrified sound. However, I continued, since I'm still listed as the custodian of record, I can submit the reports for my own access. The fraud alert won't affect my credentials. Then do it, Mason practically shouted. I will. In order. Following protocol. Unless you'd like to risk another compliance violation. For the next hour, I worked with surgical precision. Every document reviewed, every signature verified, every trail documented. They watched in silence, finally understanding that what I did wasn't just paperwork, it was legal alchemy transforming their chaos into compliance. At 8:32 p.m., I pushed enter on the final submission. Done, I said. Pending federal verification, your QQQ3 reports are now compliant. The relief in the room was palpable, but I wasn't finished. Of course, I added, closing my laptop. This is just a Band-Aid. Without a permanent custodian, you'll face the same crisis next quarter, and the quarter after that. We know, Brennan said quietly. We need to discuss your return. Monday, I said, standing. My consulting agreement covers 3 days. We can discuss permanent arrangements then. Monday, Mason's voice cracked. What if something happens before then? I smiled. The same smile I'd worn for 7 years while being overlooked. But now it had teeth. Then I suppose you'll figure it out. After all, compliance is everyone's responsibility now. Isn't that what you said? I left them sitting in their expensive conference room, staring at the federal confirmation on the screen, finally understanding what they'd thrown away. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that follows a storm. I'd slept better than I had in months, knowing that somewhere across town, Indeva's executives were probably nursing their 3rd cup of coffee and 4th anxiety attack. The wire transfer confirmation had been beautiful in its simplicity. $30, $750. Deposited at 11:47 p.m. Tuesday night. They'd even added a rush fee to ensure it cleared immediately. Nothing says desperation quite like paying extra to pay someone. I arrived at Indeva's building at exactly 8:59 a.m., pulling into the same visitor spot I'd used the day before. The federal auditor's sedans were gone, but the damage lingered in the hunched shoulders of employees smoking near the entrance, the hushed conversations that died when I walked past. Morning, Ms. Lang, Marcus said, sliding another visitor badge across the desk. Heard you saved everyone's job yesterday. Just the ones that matter, I said, thinking of Mason. The elevator ride to my new office was interrupted at the 3rd floor by David from legal. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in 5 days. His usually perfect hair disheveled his tie askew. Rebecca, thank God. Can we talk? You have 6 minutes until my first appointment. He followed me to my office, watching as I methodically unpacked a single box, my emergency compliance kit, the one I'd kept in my car since Monday. Color-coded binders, encrypted drives, the nuclear football of federal regulations. I wanted to apologize, he said. I should have fought harder when Mason proposed eliminating your position. Yes, I agreed. You should have. He made it sound so logical. Distributed responsibility, collective ownership, all that bullshit. I pulled out my leather journal, the one with the red-inked notes from that final Zoom call. Did you know that without a certified custodian, every document you file becomes legally questionable? I do now. Did you know that federal auditors can pierce the corporate veil for compliance violations? That personal liability extends to any executive who knowingly operates without proper oversight? His face went gray. Personal liability. Page 407 of the Federal Healthcare Data Protection Act. Section 19 outlines individual penalties for corporate officers. Would you like me to pull up the specific language about jail time? Jesus Christ. He's not certified in federal compliance either. David left my office at 9:04, probably heading straight to his own lawyer. I made a note in my journal, legal department, sufficiently motivated. My first official meeting as a consultant was with Carly. She arrived 5 minutes early, carrying 2 cups of real coffee, a promising start. Her designer frames were back, but the cockiness was gone, replaced by something that looked like genuine humility. I brought vanilla lattes, she said. David said that's what you drink. David's observant when motivated. I accepted the coffee, gestured to a chair. Tell me why you want to learn compliance. Because I almost went to jail. Almost doesn't count in federal prison. Try again. She set down her coffee, folded her hands. Because I realized I don't know anything. Syracuse taught me theory. Mason taught me buzzwords. But when the federal email came, I couldn't even log into the system. I felt useless. You were useless, I said. The question is whether you want to remain that way. No, I want to learn. Really learn, not just pretend. I studied her for a moment. 23, maybe 24. The same age I'd been when I'd stumbled into compliance thinking it would be temporary, a stepping stone to something more glamorous. 15 years later, glamour meant preventing federal disasters. First lesson, I said, pulling out a binder 2 inches thick. Read this. Memorize sections 1 through 4. Quiz tomorrow morning. She took the binder like it was made of gold. The Federal Healthcare Data Protection Act. The King James Bible of our profession. Learn it, love it, live it. All of it. Unless you prefer learning it in a federal courtroom. She left clutching the binder, probably Googling how many pages she'd just committed to memorizing. 463. But who was counting? At 10 a.m., sharp Timothy Brennan arrived with a contract. Not just any contract, the kind that came from emergency board meetings and bruised egos. I read it slowly, letting him sweat through his Armani suit. Senior Director of Compliance, I read aloud. Reporting directly to the CEO. Autonomous Department. Hiring Authority. Budget Control. I looked up. This is essentially a C-suite position without the title. The board was motivated to ensure compliance independence. By Patricia Holstead's report. His eye twitched, among other factors. And Mason Holt agrees to this structure. Mr. Holt's agreement is no longer required. I set down the contract. He's gone. As of 9:30 this morning, the board felt new leadership would better serve our compliance needs. I'd expected resistance negotiation, maybe a gradual shift in power. I hadn't expected a complete capitulation before lunch. Who's the new COO? Sarah Winters. She ran compliance at Blue Shield for a decade. She starts Monday. Sarah Winters. I knew her by reputation, a compliance officer who transitioned to operations without forgetting where she came from. The kind of executive who understood that innovation and regulation weren't enemies, just dance partners who needed proper choreography. The salary, I said, returning to the contract. It's more than 40%. 55% increase plus performance bonuses tied to audit results. The board wanted to ensure we could attract and retain top talent. And if someone decides I'm non-essential again, page 6, section 4. Termination requires board approval and triggers a penalty equal to 3 years' salary plus full vesting of all benefits. 3 years. They'd learned their lesson at approximately $1 million per year. I'll need to review this with my lawyer, I said. Of course. But Rebecca, he leaned forward. We need you. Not just your expertise, you. The systems you built, the relationships you've cultivated, the institutional knowledge. We tried to reduce you to a job description and nearly destroyed the company. You did destroy Mason's career. Mason destroyed Mason's career. You just refused to cushion his fall. At 11, I had an unexpected visitor. Patricia Holstead, dressed in civilian clothes, jeans, and a Georgetown sweatshirt that made her look like someone's favorite aunt rather than a federal hammer. Unofficially, she said, settling into my visitor's chair, that was the most elegant compliance revenge I've seen in 20 years. I don't know what you mean. Of course not, she smiled. You followed every regulation to the letter. Deactivated your custodian status properly. Notified the system as required. Responded to our audit request professionally. Absolutely by the book. I'm a compliance officer. The book is all I have. Bullshit. You knew exactly what would happen. The timing, the cascade effect, the panic. You orchestrated it perfectly. I sipped my coffee. If a company can't function without one person, that's a structural weakness, not orchestration. Is that what you'll tell Sarah Winters when she starts? I'll tell her the truth. Compliance isn't optional, isn't innovative, and isn't something you delegate to interns who think regulations are suggestions. Patricia stood. For what it's worth, the $100,000 fine was the minimum I could assign. By rights, it should have been millions. Why wasn't it? Because someone had the foresight to build systems that could be salvaged. Documentation so clean we could verify it independently. Audit trails that told the whole story without ambiguity. She paused at the door. That someone deserves better than being called non-essential. After she left, I sat in my quiet office looking out my new window at a city full of companies that thought they could innovate their way past federal law. How many Masons were out there streamlining critical functions into extinction? How many Carlys thrust into roles they couldn't comprehend? How many disasters waiting for someone to stop preventing them? My phone buzzed. A text from James at Vanguard. Heard Mason got fired. You're doing. Gravity's doing, I replied. I just stopped fighting it. At noon, I walked to the executive floor, my new neighborhood, come Monday. The corner office that had been Mason's was already being cleaned out, his motivational posters and innovation books packed into boxes, not unlike the ones I'd carried out just 5 days ago. Helen from HR appeared beside me. Rebecca, I owe you an apology. You were doing your job. No, I was doing Mason's job. There's a difference. She watched the maintenance crew remove Mason's standing desk. For what it's worth, I argued against eliminating your position. Not hard enough, but I tried. What changed your mind? The look on his face when Patricia Holstead explained personal liability. He genuinely didn't know. 7 figures in salary, and he didn't understand the basic legal framework of our industry. Most executives don't. They think compliance is about checking boxes. What is it about? I thought for a moment. It's about understanding that every regulation is written in someone's blood. Every requirement exists because someone somewhere suffered when it didn't. We're not just protecting the company, we're protecting the people who trust us with their data, their health, their lives. Helen nodded slowly. I'm recommending mandatory compliance training for all executives. Real training, not the online clicking through slides. I'll develop the curriculum. First lesson, federal prison, not just for other people. She actually laughed. Mason would have hated that title. Yes, I agreed. He would have. The rest of Wednesday passed in a blur of system checks and knowledge transfers. I documented every process Carly would need. Created flowcharts for federal interactions, built templates for audit responses. Not because I had to, my consulting agreement was vague about deliverables, but because it was the right thing to do. By 4 p.m., word had spread. Employees I'd barely spoken to in 7 years stopped by to welcome me back, to share their relief, to admit they'd taken my invisible work for granted. The IT team confessed they'd been locked out of critical systems since Friday, unable to even run updates without my credentials. We tried to tell Mason, one of them said, but he kept saying we'd figure it out. Did you? We figured out we were fucked without you. At 5 sharp, I began my consultant's prerogative of leaving exactly on time. No overtime heroics, no staying late to prove dedication. Just professional service within professional boundaries. As I packed up my emergency kit, Carly knocked on my door. I read the first 100 pages, she said. It's terrifying. Which part? All of it. The penalties, the requirements, the personal liability. How do you sleep knowing all this? Soundly, I said, because I follow the rules. What if you make a mistake? Then you document it, report it, and fix it. The feds are reasonable if you're honest. They're merciless if you're not. She clutched her binder tighter. Will you really train me even after everything? If you're serious about learning. This isn't a game, Carly. It's not about disruption or innovation or whatever TED Talk Mason watched last. It's about discipline, precision, and accepting that some things can't be streamlined. I'm serious, she said. I've never been more serious about anything. Then Monday, 8 a.m. Real coffee. And finish reading that binder. She left with something like hope in her eyes. I followed soon after, nodding to Marcus on my way out. See you tomorrow, Ms. Lang. One more day of consulting, I confirmed. Then Monday I'm back for good. Good, he said. Place doesn't run right without you. I drove home through rush hour traffic, thinking about essential functions and the people who perform them. How many Marcuses were out there keeping buildings secure? How many IT workers maintaining systems they didn't build? How many compliance officers preventing disasters no one would ever know about? All of them essential. All of them invisible until they weren't. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Brennan again. Rebecca, the board approved your contract terms. All of them. When can you start? Monday as agreed. But Brennan, one thing needs to be crystal clear. What's that? I'm not coming back to be anyone's safety net. I'm coming back to build a compliance department that outlasts any individual, including me. That means hiring training and creating redundancies. It means investing in systems and people. It means accepting that compliance is a cost center that prevents bankruptcy, not a profit center that needs optimizing. Understood. The board is prepared to support whatever you need. Good, because what I need is expensive. How expensive? I smiled, thinking of the $3 million per day they'd almost lost. Less expensive than the alternative. That's what we're counting on. I hung up and sat in my car for a moment, looking at the ordinary suburban house I'd left 5 days ago as a non-essential employee. I'd return Monday as something closer to untouchable, not through power or politics, but through the simple recognition of value. Thursday morning delivered the kind of poetic justice that compliance officers dream about but rarely witness. I arrived at Endeva at 8 a.m. to find the executive parking lot in chaos, security guards, cardboard boxes, and Mason Holt being escorted from the building like a common criminal. He saw me walking from the visitor section and stopped dead, his escort pausing with him. For a moment we just looked at each other across 50 feet of asphalt and 5 days of catastrophic decisions. His suit was the same Tom Ford he'd worn to fire me, but it hung differently now, like armor that had failed. The moleskin notebook he never wrote in was nowhere to be seen. Just a banker's box of personal items, and the hollow look of someone who'd learned that innovative thinking couldn't innovate away consequences. Rebecca. He said my name like it was ash in his mouth. I walked closer, maintaining the professional distance of someone who held all the cards. Mason. You did this. No, I corrected. You did this. I just declined to prevent it. The security guard, not Marcus, someone younger who probably didn't know the full story, shifted uncomfortably. Sir, we need to keep moving. Mason ignored him. I was trying to modernize, to make us competitive. You were trying to cut costs by eliminating functions you didn't understand. There's a difference. One person shouldn't have that much power, he said. It's a single point of failure. Yes, I agreed. Which is why competent executives don't eliminate that person without a succession plan. But competent executives also understand the difference between innovation and ignorance. His face flushed. The Mason who'd dismissed me with corporate buzzwords was trying to resurface, but he had no authority left, no platform from which to preach disruption. The board overreacted, he said. One compliance hiccup. I laughed, actually laughed. Mason, you exposed every executive to personal federal liability. You risked $3 million per day in fines. You nearly triggered a full FDA investigation that would have frozen our operations for months. That's not a hiccup. That's corporate manslaughter. I'll sue, he said desperately. Wrongful termination. The board will settle. With what standing you eliminated a critical position without understanding its function, ignored federal requirements, and created a crisis that required emergency intervention. Your employment agreement includes a competence clause. Section 12, if I remember correctly. I did remember. I remembered every contract, every clause, every protection the company had built into its executive agreements. The same attention to detail that made me non-essential also made me unstoppable. Ms. Lang, the security guard interrupted. Sorry, but we're supposed to have him off premises by 8:30. Of course, I stepped aside. Don't let me delay the innovative streamlining of Mason's career. He started to say something else, probably some last attempt at startup wisdom or disruption philosophy. But the words died as he looked at me, really looked at me. The middle-aged woman he'd dismissed as a relic standing there in a suit that cost less than his shoes, holding the knowledge that had destroyed him. "You knew," he said finally. "When you deactivated your credentials, you knew exactly what would happen." "I knew the regulations. I knew the requirements. I knew the systems." I paused. "I also knew you'd ignore anyone who tried to explain them." They led him away after that, his banker's box balanced like a tombstone for innovative thinking. I watched until his Tesla disappeared from the lot, then walked into the building where my expertise was no longer non-essential. The 7th floor felt different without Mason's energy, calmer, more focused, less like a startup accelerator and more like a company that handled billions in healthcare data. Helen was in conference room A with someone I didn't recognize, a woman in her 50s with the kind of neutral expression that suggested either HR or legal. Rebecca Helen stood as I entered. "This is Sandra Keynes from Board Relations. She wanted to speak with you." Sandra Keynes had the handshake of someone who'd fired CEOs and the smile of someone who enjoyed it. "Ms. Lang, the board asked me to convey their appreciation for your handling of the recent situation. I submitted reports as contracted. Nothing more. Please, we all know you could have prevented this crisis with a single phone call. Instead, you let it unfold to its natural conclusion. The board recognizes the educational value of your approach." I sat down, curious where this was going. Board representatives didn't usually visit consultant compliance officers to chat about educational values. "The board has some questions," Sandra continued, "about the depth of integration between your personal credentials and our federal systems. It seems concerning that one person's departure could trigger such cascading failures." "It is concerning," I agreed. "I've been raising that concern for 3 years. The response was always that redundancy was expensive and unnecessary. And now you understand that redundancy is cheaper than catastrophe." She pulled out a tablet, swiped through what looked like audit reports. "According to Patricia Holstead's preliminary findings, you built 17 critical systems that require your personal biometric authentication. Is that accurate?" 19, actually. Patricia missed the backup verification protocols and the emergency response system. And these can't be transferred. They can be rebuilt, from scratch, with proper federal approval. The process takes approximately 18 months and requires maintaining parallel systems during the transition. Sandra's expression didn't change, but Helen went pale. 18 months of duplicate systems meant millions in additional costs. "Or," Sandra prompted, "or I maintain them while training certified replacements and gradually transitioning authority. 6 months minimal disruption, no federal flags. Which requires your continued employment." "Which requires my continued cooperation," I corrected. "Employment is just paperwork. Cooperation is a choice." Sandra smiled, then the kind of smile that suggested she'd found what she was looking for. "The board is prepared to offer additional incentives beyond the current contract. Stock options, retention bonuses, expanded authority. I don't want incentives. I want infrastructure. A real compliance department with real funding and real authority. I want to hire 5 senior analysts, 3 system architects, and a federal liaison. I want a training budget that doesn't require begging. I want compliance integration from the design phase, not as an afterthought. That's a significant investment. Mason's severance package is significant. Federal fines are significant. My requests are operational necessities." She made notes on her tablet. "Anything else?" "Yes. I want Carly Morrison assigned to my department. Full-time. Not because she's qualified, she's not, but because she's learned humility. That's rarer than competence and more valuable than innovation. The board will consider your requirements." "No," I said. "The board will approve them. Today. Because tomorrow Patricia Holstead releases her final report, and you want me here committed and cooperative when that happens." Sandra's smile widened. "You've gotten more aggressive since Friday." "I've gotten visible. There's a difference." After she left, Helen stayed behind, fidgeting with her phone. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something. About Mason." "What about him?" "He wasn't the only one who wanted you gone." There were others board members who thought compliance was bloated executives who saw your department as a bottleneck. Mason was just the one willing to pull the trigger.
I know.
You know, of course, Mason wasn't smart enough to eliminate my position on his own. He was just arrogant enough to do it without understanding the consequences. So what happens to the others? I thought about the 7 years I'd spent protecting people who saw me as overhead. The late nights preventing crises they'd never know about. The regulations I'd memorized so they could innovate in ignorance. They learn, I said finally, or they leave. But they don't get to hide behind someone else's execution while keeping their hands clean. Helen nodded. Sarah Winters starts Monday. You'll like her. She's careful. Careful is good. Careful keeps you out of federal prison. My phone buzzed. Patricia Holstead. Final report complete. You'll want to see this before it goes wide. Coffee. I met Patricia at the same expensive cafe where I'd once brought Mason to explain why we couldn't just use DocuSign for federal documents. She'd traded her government power suit for jeans and a blazer, looking more like a professor than a federal enforcer. Unofficial meeting, I asked, sitting down. Completely unofficial. Officially, I'm getting coffee. Unofficially, she slid a folder across the table. Your system saved them. I opened the folder. Her report was thorough, brutally so. Every failure cataloged, every violation documented, every moment where Endeva had teetered on the edge of federal disaster. Page 12, she said, my favorite part. I turned to it. A full analysis of my compliance infrastructure with phrases like exceptional documentation, innovative verification protocols, and prevented catastrophic failure through systematic redundancy. You're making me sound heroic. You're making yourself sound employed. This report goes to every healthcare company on the Eastern Seaboard. How many job offers do you think you'll get? I already have a job. Do you, or do you have leverage? I closed the folder. Both. Good. Use it. The Masons of the world are everywhere convinced that regulations are obstacles instead of guardrails. They need people like you. People like us, I corrected. You could have destroyed Endeva. The violations were there. The penalties were justified. But the systems were sound. The documentation was clean. One arrogant executive doesn't negate 7 years of exceptional compliance. She paused. Besides, watching them scramble was punishment enough. That panic in Mason's eyes when he realized personal liability was real beautiful. We drank our overpriced coffee in comfortable silence. Two women who understood that the boring parts of business were often the most critical. They're hiring Sarah Winters as COO, I said eventually. Good choice. She knows where the bodies are buried because she helped dig the graves properly. Patricia checked her phone. Speaking of which, I need to go terrify some pharmaceuticals executives. Their custodian has been sick for 3 weeks. Vacation. Rehab. But they're pretending otherwise, which means they're falsifying federal records. Ouch. Right. At least Mason was honestly incompetent. She stood, dropped cash on the table. Rebecca. Next time someone calls you non-essential, call me first. I'll explain exactly how essential you are, with penalties attached. After she left, I sat with her report thinking about Monday. Not the Monday that had just passed with its federal notices and corporate panic, but the Monday coming when I'd walk back into Endeva as something more than essential, as someone who'd proven that infrastructure matters, that expertise has value, that sometimes the best innovation is simply following the rules. My phone rang. Brennan. The board approved everything, he said without preamble. The positions, the budget, the authority. All of it. Good. They also approved a signing bonus, $50,000. The CFO called it combat pay for the Mason era. I don't need combat pay. Take it anyway. Buy something nice, like a sledgehammer for the next executive who tries to innovate away federal law. I laughed despite myself. I'll stick with documentation. It's more devastating. So we'll see you Monday. 8 a.m. sharp. Rebecca, thank you for coming back, for fixing this, for not letting us burn just to prove a point. I did prove a point, I said. Just not the one you expected. I hung up and finished my coffee watching the city bustle with people rushing to jobs they'd complain about later. How many of them were essential? How many were invisible until the moment they weren't? All of them, probably. The security guards and IT workers, the compliance officers and cleaning crews, the infrastructure that kept the glamorous parts functioning. All of them one executive decision away from being deemed unnecessary. But not me. Not anymore. I'd been fired as non-essential and returned as irreplaceable. Not through manipulation or revenge, but through the simple act of letting reality assert itself. Mason thought he'd streamlined operations. Instead, he demonstrated why some things can't be optimized away. The folder Patricia had given me weighed maybe 8 ounces, but it contained 7 years of work, validated a career vindicated, and a future where my value wasn't subject to the whims of executives who confused movement with progress. I gathered my things and prepared for one last day of consulting. Tomorrow, I'd be unemployed again, technically. A weekend of freedom between contractor and employee, between vindication and responsibility. But Monday, I'd return to build something better. A department that couldn't be disappeared by a buzzword. A system that recognized expertise. An infrastructure that would outlast any individual, including me. They'd called me non-essential. Now they'd call me senior director. Friday arrived with the kind of finality that made everything else feel like prelude. My last day as a consultant, the end of the most expensive 3 days in Endeava's compliance history. I arrived at 10 a.m. consultants' hours because I could. The building felt different, not physically but energetically. People nodded when they saw me, actually made eye contact. The invisible woman who'd kept them compliant had become visible through absence, and now they saw me everywhere. My temporary office was busy from the moment I arrived. Carly was already there, halfway through the federal regulation binder, highlighting sections with the focus of someone who'd discovered religion after a near-death experience. "Question," she said without looking up. "Section 47 says custodian verification requires biometric confirmation, but Section 93 mentions alternative authentication protocols. Which takes precedence?" I smiled. The right question, finally. Both. Biometric is primary, alternatives are for emergency scenarios. Page 300 defines what constitutes an emergency. So not just forgetting your password. Not unless forgetting your password coincides with a nuclear attack. She made a note in the margin. Color-coded, I noticed. The student was learning. By 11, I'd processed 17 requests for quick chats about compliance integration. Department heads who'd ignored my emails for years suddenly wanted to understand how federal requirements might impact their next project. Amazing what a $3 million near miss could do for interdepartmental cooperation. Sarah Winters arrived at noon. The new COO looked exactly like her reputation, polished but practical, wearing a suit that said authority without screaming it. She found me in the break room, making what might be my last cup of terrible office coffee. "Rebecca Lang," she said, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you." "All accurate, I'm afraid." "Good. I prefer accuracy to optimism." She poured her own coffee, grimaced at the taste, but drank it anyway. A good sign. "Tell me about Mason." "What about him? How did someone that incompetent reach COO?" "He wasn't incompetent," I said. "He was selectively ignorant. He understood marketing, growth strategies, investor relations. He just thought compliance was beneath those concerns." "And you proved otherwise." "Federal law proved otherwise. I just got out of the way." She studied me over her coffee cup. "I've seen Patricia Holstead's report. Your systems are remarkable. But systems can be rebuilt. What I need to know is whether you're coming back to maintain the status quo or to build something better." "Better how?" "Integration from inception. Compliance officers in every major project from day one. Not as obstacles, but as architects. Can you work that way?" "I've been trying to work that way for 7 years. Mason thought it would slow innovation." "Mason thought a lot of things. The board hired me specifically because I disagree with most of them." She set down her cup. "I want compliance to have veto power." "Actual veto power." If a project can't meet federal requirements, it doesn't launch. Period. No exceptions, no workarounds, no, we'll figure it out later. Can you handle that responsibility? Can you handle the pushback developers hate the word no? They hate federal prison more. I extended my hand. Then yes, I can handle it. We shook on it, a deal more binding than any contract. Sarah Winters understood what Mason never had. Compliance wasn't a cost center, it was catastrophe insurance. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Timothy Brennan arrived with a banker's box, which he set on my desk with unusual ceremony. "What's this?" I asked. "Mason's personal items, the ones from his office safe." "Why would I want—" "Look inside." I opened the box. On top was Mason's beloved moleskin notebook, the one he carried everywhere but never used. Beneath it, folders. My folders. Every proposal I'd submitted for compliance improvements over the last 2 years, each stamped with a red "denied" across the front. "He kept them," I said. "Everyone, look at the margins." I opened the first folder. My proposal for biometric authentication submitted 18 months ago. In the margins, Mason's handwriting, "Too expensive, unnecessary, Lang overreacting as usual." The second folder, my request for additional staff. Margin note, "Compliance fully staffed, Lang Empire Building." The third, my warning about custodian redundancy. Lang creating job security through false crisis. Page after page of my ignored expertise, all carefully filed by the man who deemed me non-essential. "Why did he keep them?" I asked. "CYA, Brennan said. "Cover your ass. If something went wrong, he could claim he'd reviewed and rejected your proposals based on business judgment. Except his business judgment nearly cost us $3 million a day. Which is why they're yours now. The board wanted you to know that every warning you gave was documented. Every prediction you made was proven right. Every disaster you prevented was recorded, even by someone who didn't believe in them." I closed the folders, looked at the box of vindication I'd never wanted. "What am I supposed to do with these?" "Whatever you want. Frame them, burn them, use them as training materials for what happens when ego overrides expertise." After he left, I sat with Mason's notebook. The empty pages mocked me, all that potential for notes, for learning, for understanding, wasted on someone who thought listening was beneath innovation. On impulse, I opened it to the first page and wrote, "Compliance isn't about saying no, it's about finding ways to say yes without going to prison. R. Lang." Then I closed it and tossed it in the trash. Some lessons couldn't be taught, only learned through expensive experience. At 4 p.m. I began my final rounds. My consultant access would expire at 5, and Monday's senior director credentials wouldn't activate until 8 a.m. For 63 hours, I'd be nobody. Not employee, not consultant, just Rebecca Lang, private citizen who knew too much about federal healthcare regulations. David from legal caught me in the hallway. "Drinks tonight. The team wants to celebrate your return." I haven't returned yet. "Monday's a formality. You're back. We all know it." "Do you? Or are you just relieved the crisis passed?" He had the grace to look ashamed. "Both. But Rebecca, we learned something this week. You weren't just protecting the company. You were protecting us. Personally. That personal liability issue is real and terrifying. Is something I should have understood years ago. I'm sorry. Apologies. I'd collected dozens this week, all sincere, all too late. But late was better than never, and fear was an excellent teacher." "Drinks sound good," I said, "but not a celebration, a wake. For Mason's career. For the old way of doing things. The idea that compliance is optional, that expertise is expendable, that innovation means ignoring infrastructure. All of that died this week." By 4:45, I was back in my temporary office for the last time. Carly was still there now, on page 300 of the manual, looking simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. "Go home," I told her. "Just 50 more pages. Go home. The regulations will still be there Monday." She closed the binder reluctantly. "Rebecca, why are you helping me after I tried to take your job?" "You didn't try to take my job. You were handed a responsibility you couldn't understand by someone who didn't value it. That's not theft, it's negligence. Still, you could have let me fail. You did fail. Spectacularly. The question now is whether you'll learn from it. She gathered her things, paused at the door. I will. Learn, I mean. I want to be like you someday. No, I said. You want to be better. I spent 7 years being invisible. Don't make that mistake. After she left, I took one last look around the office that had briefly been mine. The window showed evening settling over the city lights beginning to twinkle in other buildings where other essential people were finishing other invisible work. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number that turned out to be Patricia Holstead's personal cell. Final report releases Monday morning. You might want to update your LinkedIn. You're about to be very popular. Popular. After 7 years of being overlooked, I was about to become the compliance officer everyone wanted. The one who'd let a company almost burn to prove a point about value. At exactly 5 p.m., I badged out for the last time as a consultant. Marcus was ending his shift too, gathering his crossword puzzles and preparing to hand over to the night guard. See you Monday, Ms. Lang. Bright and early Marcus. Good. This place needs people who know what they're doing. This place needs people, period. The ones who show up, do the work, and keep things running. All of them essential. He smiled. Even security guards. Especially security guards. You're the first face people see, the last one they remember. You've been here longer than most executives. If that's not essential, nothing is. I left him with that truth, and walked to my car no longer carrying boxes. Everything I needed was already in place. Systems built, relationships established, expertise proven. Monday I'd return not to rescue Endava, but to rebuild it into something that recognized value before it vanished. My phone rang as I reached my car. James from Vanguard. Last chance, he said. Patricia's report is going to make you the most sought-after compliance officer on the East Coast. We could triple your Endava offer. It's not about the money. Then what's it about? I thought for a moment. Redemption. Not mine, theirs. They made a massive mistake and admitted it. They're willing to invest in preventing the next one. How often does that happen in corporate America? Almost never. Exactly. So I'm going to help them build something better. A compliance infrastructure that can't be disappeared by the next Mason who thinks innovation means ignoring reality. The next Mason. There's always a next Mason. But now there's also a documented case study of what happens when you fire essential infrastructure. Patricia's report will be required reading in business schools. And you'll be a legend. I'll be a senior director with hiring authority and budget control. That's better than legend. That's power. He laughed. Call me if you change your mind, or if you train a replacement who needs a job. Give me 2 years. I'll have 5 replacements trained and certified. Because you're essential. Because I'm building something that isn't. I drove home through streets I'd traveled for 7 years past the coffee shop, where I'd bought countless vanilla lattes, past the life I'd built around a job that hadn't valued me until I vanished. But I hadn't vanished. I'd simply stepped aside and let reality take its course. Mason thought he'd eliminated redundancy. Instead, he'd eliminated the redundancy that made elimination survivable. $3 million an hour. That's what my absence could have cost. Not because I was irreplaceable, but because they'd never bothered to try. They'd assumed compliance was simple, that anyone could do it, that innovation meant moving fast and breaking things. They'd learned that some things, when broken, cost more than innovation could ever earn. Monday I'd return not as the woman they'd fired, but as the one they'd hired back at a premium. Not bitter, not vengeful, just vindicated. Ready to build the department I'd always envisioned, train the successors I'd always wanted, create the infrastructure that would outlast any executive's ego. They'd called me non-essential. Now they knew better. And someday, when Carly or her successors were running compliance with the same quiet competence I'd shown when the systems hummed along without my constant attention, when compliance was truly everyone's responsibility, because everyone understood it, then I'd be genuinely non-essential. That was the real revenge. Not the crisis, not the panic, not even Mason's termination. The revenge was coming back to build something so robust, so integrated, so essential that it could survive without me. Because that's what essential really means, not being the only one who can do something, but ensuring something gets done. Even when you're gone. Even when they forget your name. Even when the next Mason arrives full of buzzwords and empty notebooks ready to innovate away the foundations. The infrastructure remains. The compliance continues. The essential endures. And somewhere in a windowless office or a corner suite, with a view, someone who understands the difference between cost and value keeps the whole thing running. Invisible, perhaps, but never non-essential. Never again. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate revenge and vindication. I hope Rebecca's journey resonated with those of you who've ever felt undervalued or overlooked in your workplace. Where are you listening from today? Drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on this story. Have you ever experienced something similar? Let's share our experiences and connect as a community. If you enjoyed this tale of compliance karma, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of workplace justice. And if you really want to help others discover this story, hit the hype button to boost its reach. Until next time, remember, you're not just essential, you're irreplaceable. Stay valued, stay visible.